Imagine you've been wronged by someone in your life. A friend, a boss, a cousin, maybe even someone closer. This person, maybe in a well-meaning way, apologizes and tells you that you need to forgive them. But something inside of you resists. There's this nagging feeling, a question about whether this person has really earned forgiveness or not. This episode is about that kind of resistance, why it makes a certain kind of sense, and why forgiveness gets mistaken for weakness in our culture, and what forgiving actually does when practiced seriously. Welcome back to American Socrates. I'm your host, Matt Rupert. I want to start this episode off by trying to talk about the golden rule. It's something I think a lot of us have heard growing up in the United States. You know, as a Christian country, we talk about the golden rule all the time, whether you're Christian or whether you're secular. It's this idea, maybe the common version of the golden rule is some form of reciprocity. If you treat people the way that you want to be treated, then we will all end up treating each other in this sort of respectful and dignified way. This is the logic of commodious human relations, where we expect a kind of equality to exist, and from that to result in and from a mutually beneficial kind of relationship. I'm doing for you, and then you're going to do back for me. It's a sort of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours relationship. This is all a bit abstract, and it's perhaps a touch naive, but there's definitely something to this idea of I'm going to do for you and then you're going to do for me, and that is going to be the basis and the foundation of our relationship. So then if I treat you the way that I want to be treated and you're going to treat me the way I just treated you, it's all going to work out. I will get treated the way I want to be treated. You'll get treated the way you want to be treated. And in that sort of exchange, everyone treats everyone exactly the way they would wish to be treated. There's more here too, though. You shouldn't be starting what you can't finish sort of mindset, or, don't dish out what you can't take. If you think it's funny to play practical jokes on other people, you shouldn't be upset if they're going to play practical jokes on you. And so, in the same time that you are asking people to treat you a certain way, by acting towards them that way, you have to be willing to, or should I say tolerant of, the way they're going to treat you if you're treating them in a certain way. The expectation then is something along the lines of like, well, you thought it was funny, or you thought it was okay to treat me this way. Why isn't it okay for me to treat you in the same manner? Essentially, you don't take from others if you don't want them taking from you. And you don't give to others if you don't want people giving things to you. That sort of idea. The golden rule is generally associated with Jesus of Nazareth, but it's actually a much older idea than him. Much, much older, in fact. Versions of this same sort of logic, this reciprocity of doing unto others as they would do unto you, goes back thousands of years before Christ. And that makes sort of sense. It's a very practical sort of social ethics, and almost every culture has independently arrived at some version of it over time. It keeps communities functional. It's pragmatic in that way. It helps grease the wheel of our social interactions, our businesses, our communities, those sorts of things. It is not, however, a terribly radical notion. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. And this is not to say that Jesus doesn't have a contribution to make here. I think he really does. I think he breaks the reciprocity framework entirely, in fact. The notion that he adds to this golden rule is the notion of love your enemies, which changes the entire tenor of forgiveness. It broadens its reach to those who have transgressed against us beyond the ones who were just doing it innocently, right? People sometimes make a mistake and they hurt you, but this is actually asking you to forgive even people who transgress against us willfully, maliciously, cruelly. So In this interpretation of it, the golden rule reading of forgiveness, we're being asked to forgive everyone, forgive all. The golden rule then acts sort of like a responsibility absolving serum, right? A potion that if you drank it, it would place the ultimate responsibility for transgressions on somewhere else, not on the person, not on you, like on God maybe, or accident, or nature, or just something. This leaves us free then to forgive wholly and freely each and every individual. In this way, we can forgive not 7 times, as the old Hebrew custom for repentance dictated, but 70 times 7. That is, we can forgive infinitely. We can forgive everybody for everything, and it's going to be okay. So we can always forgive, and we can always forgive completely. And that is something that we actually have a lot of trouble with. It doesn't always feel right to us. But this Christian ideal is not a refinement of fairness then. It's a direct challenge sort of to the logic of fairness, the logic of reciprocity. And the logic of reciprocity turns into this kind of vengeance or retribution. It's an eye for an eye. You did this to me, I return that harm onto you. So what's being asked of us here is not to simply revisit harms that have been done to us, put them back on the doer, and some hope that that will force them to quit, right? Like, if you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you, so you better not do that. Or even like, well, if you reward me, I'll reward you, and so you better reward me, leading to some kind of mutual aid. It moves beyond that. We're acting well towards people who really haven't earned it. We're returning good for harm. And that's a really radical stretch of what it means to do unto others what you would have them do unto you. But it does make its own sense. We would ask for complete forgiveness of ourselves if we had believed we had done someone wrong. And so we would probably want to extend that same sort of forgiveness to everybody so that it could then in return be extended to us. The difficulty, of course, comes in a kind of moral scorekeeping. We'll call it the scorekeeping problem. This moral bookkeeping is the default human operating system. We track all kinds of things like this. We track debts, we track attendance, we track people's effort. We look at who shows up, who didn't, who got credit that they didn't earn, or they got a job that they didn't merit. And who said something horrible, or did something petty, or who never really apologized, right? We keep tabs on all of this. We keep score on people. And this makes some kind of adaptive sense, especially in small, resource-scarce communities where reputation and reciprocity are going to be vital survival tools. We're going to need people to not just take constantly, but to also give. The problem, though, comes in the costs of all this scorekeeping. It ultimately accumulates. And as I see it, it does so in 3 major domains in our lives. The first one is families. Most long-term estrangements in a family where you've gotten into it with somebody and you just can't seem to reconcile, most of that happens in the same kind of pattern, the same kind of way. There's a real injury, there's a failure to address it in a meaningful way, and then perhaps years of calcified accounting, where both sides are waiting for the other one to make the first move or to challenge the status quo. The original wound then becomes almost irrelevant in the flow of time. It's healed over, but the scar is what people keep pointing to. That's what they hold on to. And what sustains the estrangement then is the ledger. It's that scorebook. I'm not reaching out after what they did. And so the practical result of all this is just lost years with that person, fractured families, a vague sense, perhaps eventually, that nobody can quite remember what it was all about. Another place where this accumulates is in business and in workplaces. Unaddressed resentment is one of the most expensive and visible costs in any organization or even across organizations, like businesses to businesses or businesses to customers. As an employee, for example, who's been passed over for a promotion, who never really got a real explanation why they didn't land the job. The manager, maybe, who catalogs every mistake that an employee makes. A customer who feels unsupported by the business. The team that stops sharing information because people begin to protect themselves, or maybe their division, or maybe their business in some kind of competitive sense. Nobody names it, but the work starts to degrade, and resentment doesn't really announce itself in this way. It just leaches in and begins to permeate the entire system. It just quietly makes everything harder and slower. You feel less like you want to be around these people, less like you want to see them. You start dreading going to work. You avoid tasks where you know you'll have to see or encounter this other person. And that costs. A third place where this sort of scorekeeping begins to accumulate is in the larger sense of politics and in communities. This one might actually be the most prescient today. Group identities are often being built around grievances rather than, say, aspirations. It's not like we're all sharing a dream and that's what brings us together as a party. It's all that we hate these people together. Those people are so bad. They make such big mistakes. They do terrible things to other people. And so we just want to associate our group as just we're not them. And these become self-sustaining identities in a certain way. The grievance, in fact, becomes the identity. Human individuals then are reduced to parties or subsets of parties. Acknowledging progress or complexity feels like a betrayal of that identity, and so becomes a kind of trespass against people. How could you say that you want to do things differently? Doesn't that mean that you're saying that we're doing things wrong? Aren't you trying to tell me that we're bad people? So scorekeeping on this level becomes cultural, right? It's interpreted as a personal attack, and the cycle perpetuates because stepping out of that or just walking away feels like some kind of loss. But nevertheless, no side wants to be the one that blinks in this game of political chicken. The common mechanism then across all three of these is resentment as a way of keeping you anchored to a fixed past while the present keeps moving forward. In other words, you keep dwelling on an old wound. You hold on to it because you need to preserve it so that others can see the injustice that was done to you. You want to show them the scars, point to them and say, like, look, this is what I had to suffer. This is what I had to endure. If you forgive, that goes away. And you don't have the ability to kind of brag to other people about how hard your life is, about all the terrible things that you've had to endure. It also requires an ongoing cognitive and emotional maintenance. And you have to keep this injury alive. You have to keep rehearsing it. You have to keep going over it in your mind. You have to do that in order to justify the position of victim that you hold for yourself. One way that this has been expressed to me is you have to hold on to the dead bodies of your past selves, like past versions of you. You hold on to those dead bodies so that you can continue to wring your hands and rend your clothes and cry out, I have been murdered. If you hold a funeral for these people and you put them in the ground so that you can move on, well, then that starts to look like a self-betrayal to you. You start to feel like, well, I can't do that, or I'm betraying these other versions of myself, these past versions that suffered. I'm dishonoring their memory or something like that. And so we do this kind of maintenance where we hold on to these grudges, to these past wrongs and things like that. And that kind of maintenance has a real cost of its own. It costs us personally to hold on to all of that stuff. Forgiveness, then, is probably the most operationally misunderstood concept in our everyday moral life. most of our, very understandable resistance to it comes from conflating three different things, I think. The first one is, forgiveness itself, right? So it's that internal decision to stop organizing your emotional life around some old injury. It's a private action. It's entirely unilateral. Comes from you, for you. It doesn't really necessarily involve anybody else. It doesn't require anyone else's involvement or even their awareness, and it doesn't demand anything of them. It doesn't demand that they change or do anything. You can still forgive them. The second thing that we conflate with forgiveness is reconciliation, which is actually about restoring the relationship. Reconciliation, unlike forgiveness, is bilateral. It takes two people. It requires accountability and often changed behavior on the part of the other person. You hurt me, and if you want me to maintain the relationship with you, you're going to have to apologize, and you're going to have to change the way you've been acting towards me because it's unacceptable. That's reconciliation. Apologizing is an important part of reconciliation, but it's not itself forgiveness. So we tend to cross those two over. People think that when you've apologized, you had to have forgiven somebody, and that's not necessarily true. Apologies and forgiveness can be different things. Reconciliation is also optional. You don't have to reconcile with people. Sometimes it's unwise, as in cases of ongoing abuse. If we start to conflate reconciliation then with forgiveness, we're apt to believe that we must continue to interact and potentially absorb damage simply because we've forgiven other people. And that's not true. The third thing that we tend to conflate here is trust, which is built, or should I say rebuilt, through a consistency of behavior over time, and is also entirely separate from forgiveness. Forgiveness does not reinstate trust. Or, in other words, you don't have to trust someone just because you've forgiven them. Trust has to be re-earned, independently of forgiveness. Without trust, we start to feel vulnerable around people. If I don't trust you, I feel like you might be a threat to me, a danger to me. And I take protections. I guard myself against you. So if I end up conflating notions like trust and forgiveness, I'm likely to think of forgiveness as exposing myself to people who are out to get me, out to hurt me. And that makes it feel unwise to forgive. It makes it feel dangerous to forgive. But once we separate these three notions into different things, our practical picture completely changes. You can forgive someone and never speak to them again. You can forgive a person who hurt you and still keep them out of your life. The forgiveness then is really about you. Specifically, it's about whether you want to continue to let a past event govern your present state. It's not about the other person, and it's not even about your relationship to that other person. One operational definition worth considering here is forgiveness is a refusal to let someone else's past actions determine our present condition or our future mental and emotional health. I'll give you a personal example. I was out raking my leaves one day, and my neighbor came out of the house and yelled at me from his yard to my yard for something I'm not even sure what he really wanted. It didn't even seem to make any sense to me. He was complaining about something in my yard or the way it looked or something like that. And he was vicious about it, as if he was entitled to tell me how I should keep my house or keep my yard. And if I didn't do the things that he liked, that somehow I was wrong. It made me pissed. I was angry for the rest of the day. It made me feel shamed for simply being who I was or what I was. And it took me, even knowing all of this, it took me a good amount of time, maybe a week or so, before I was able to forgive this guy. This guy's not capable of thinking better. He probably had a terrible life where his parents didn't really care for him. They criticized him. They judged him for all kinds of things. And now he thinks that that's how you behave with other people. You just yell at them from across the street. Tell them horrible things because that was probably what was done to him. He's not capable of doing better. And because of that, I can forgive him. I can totally forgive him. Does that mean I'm going to listen to him? Does that mean we're going to have a good relationship now? No, probably not. But I forgive him for being an asshole. He probably can't help it. If he could, he wouldn't have been an asshole. And so I'm not going to carry that weight, that shame with me any longer. It's not important enough to color what I think about my own life, to shape it, to mold it. Some shame is. Some shame you should carry with you because it helps keep you from becoming a monster. But this is not one of those cases. So maybe, as a practical exercise, you can identify like one resentment that you're currently carrying. You could ask yourself, who is actually being governed by this? Is the other person thinking about it anywhere near as much as you are? What would it cost you in concrete terms to simply decide, I'm done with this. I'm not thinking about it anymore. And just forgive it and let it go. Something tells me that if you do this, you'll be able to find at least a couple of things pretty quickly. Things, old grudges, old wounds that you have rehashed again and again, over the years. Every now and then they come back up and you think of them. Maybe it's just time to let those go. So I guess what I'm saying here is that the objection to forgiveness that we mostly inflict upon ourselves, it falls out of this conflation with reconciliation and trust, but it deserves a direct answer. If I forgive people who hurt me, am I not signaling its acceptability? Am I not telling them that I'm okay with it, what they did? Doesn't forgiveness kind of protect the transgressor or the abuser? This objection is almost always based on this conflation, but we're of course free to address these items separately. Forgiveness makes no statements to other people. Forgiveness here then can be thought of as universal and total because it's really a struggle simply inside of you. It's all entirely internal. This isn't about the other person. And in fact, you could forgive somebody who's dead. They're long dead. They needn't exist even in your life at this point or in any future point to be eligible for forgiveness. An abuser doesn't benefit from your private decision to stop carrying resentment, unless you also choose to try and reconcile the relationship, which, like I've already said, is an entirely separate choice. And reconciliation without genuine accountability and earnest behavioral change isn't itself forgiveness, not in practice. It's really just a failure to hold boundaries. So they're not the same thing. Returning to a harmful relationship because you feel you should forgive is a misapplication of the entire concept. If you're being made to feel like you should forgive because a transgressor has merely said that they're sorry, then that is a boundary violation. You're being pushed into something that is unhealthy. So in short, you're allowed to privately forgive while at the same time holding people accountable for their actions. The two are just not the same and should not be considered the same. The goal then of forgiveness is merely to end that internal war inside yourself. It doesn't reopen any closed doors. It does not restore access to you. It doesn't make you vulnerable. It does not require pretending or submission or even discomfort. A person can forgive, like say, an alcoholic and an abusive parent and maintain at the same time a firm, no-contact position. A person can forgive a colleague who betrayed them and never confide in that colleague ever again. A person can forgive a supporter of a different political party without betraying their core identity and what it means to be them. The forgiveness then is real, but so are the boundaries. Where the objection has legitimate force here is that in communities or in relationships where pressure to forgive is used as a tool to silence victims and protect abusers, well, that sometimes happens. And that happens in churches, it happens in families, it happens in other institutions. In those cases, then, what is being called forgiveness is actually more like coerced reconciliation. You're being asked to forgive in the name of Jesus Christ, but the reality is you're being forced to reconcile so that we can just sweep this all under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. And that's worth calling out clearly. Real forgiveness is never something that someone else can demand of you on any timeline. It's your choice and yours alone. And even if you should do it for yourself, you do not owe it to anyone else. So we should not make it a performance. Forgiveness can't be rushed without becoming something else. And on the flip side, it's never your job to demand forgiveness from anyone that you have crossed. The golden rule, then, taken seriously, is not about being nice. It's a lot more complex than that. And it's more complex than simple reciprocity, simply getting back what you give. It asks you to act based on your own values rather than in reaction to other people's behavior. And that's a genuinely hard standard to meet. It's certainly harder than reciprocity. It's harder than just being plain old fair. And it's certainly harder than keeping score, as we're psychologically predisposed to do. So with that in mind, maybe forgive yourself today. At least a little. More than likely, you haven't been as forgiving as you could have been. And you are a good place to start. Even if you're pretty good at this already, we all make mistakes. So forgive yourself for not being as forgiving as you could be. It's never too late to start this process of letting go and forgiving. So remember, while scorekeeping feels like a sense of justice, often it is not. It's just an anchor around your neck that's always threatening to drag you under. Ask yourself, is there something you're carrying that you've been calling justice that is actually just holding on to past wounds? And if so, how much longer do you want to wait before you're ready to let that wound heal?
Thanks for tuning in to American Socrates. If today's episode of Philosophy got you thinking in new ways, make sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. New, full episodes drop every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, leave a review. It helps others find us, and it means a lot. And if you know someone who could use a little more practical wisdom in their life, share this episode with them. Until next time, keep questioning everything.